This week's episode of the Tribcast is brought to you by the Texas Tribune Membership Program. Hello and welcome to the Tribcast for Tuesday, July 29th. I'm Eleanor Klibanoff, law and politics reporter here at the Tribune, joined this week by a Matthew Watkins stand-in, politics editor Jasper Scherer. Jasper, thanks for being here.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Matthew is in luxurious, beautiful Port Aransas, the place to be in the summer. And I would make fun of it, but we are in the Texas capital, so not much better. I am curious, Jasper, before we jump in, we're in the special session. You're now an editor. It's your first session in how many years? That you're not, sorry, I should tee that up. First session, how many years that you are not on the floor of the Capitol?
Oh, man. Well, I started covering state politics as a reporter right around when the Dems broke quorum. I guess, I might have specified broke quorum the first time if we get a second one momentarily here. Yeah. But so 2021, the first special session there was my first. Yeah.
Not the first time, 2003, but the
right.
First time. Which also probably wasn't the first time in the last couple of years.
Recent history,
yes.
Right.
John Moritz would say,
right.
This was the second time.
He has a longer memory than me.
Right.
Yes.
So are you missing being on the floor?
I think so. I mean, it's been sort of slow so far, so it's I miss kind of the idea of being around the hustle and bustle, but I still feel I can live vicariously through you guys being there. So
do you want to trade?
Maybe I'll make my way down there just to relive the glory days a little bit. Yeah.
We love that. Well, we are going to jump right in. Last week we had an episode with the chair of the Texas Democratic Party, Kendall Scudder, sort of looking at the Dems' prospects for the 2026 midterms. This week we are going to look at the other side of the aisle, the Republicans' prospects. I will say we did extend an invitation to GOP chair Abraham George, who it wasn't the right time for him to join us, but he said he plans to join in the future. So we will extend that invitation, an open invitation to Chairman George.
Love to have him. Yeah.
Yes, anytime. So in his stead, we have the Dean of Texas Talk Radio, Mark Davis, on the air for more than 40 years in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. His bio, and I think we would agree with this, says the foremost conservative voice locally and nationally, a morning fixture on 660 AM The Answer. He is also a columnist for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, McClatchy Newspapers, Newsweek, and Town Hall. Mark, thanks for joining us.
It is my great pleasure. Thank you, guys. Appreciate being here.
Yeah. Well, I want to sort of start before we jump into 2026 and talk about, look back in time a little bit and talk about 2024. Just a gangbusters election for Republicans in Texas, nationally. I'm curious, Mark, were you anticipating such a good year for Republicans nationally, with Trump at the top of the ticket? How did it sort of line up with your expectations?
Since everything is relative, and as I'm sitting here doing shows in this room, talking about the presidential race, talking about national issues, talking about Texas issues, the Texas landscape seemed pretty baked in. Democrats have had a long and tortured experience ever since I've been back in my native Texas, 1994. We're going to turn it purple. We're going to turn it blue. Guys, how's that working out? And I don't know. Never say never, but that's not happening even in the near term. Now, nationally, it was not as cut and dried because Trump is always the X factor. There's going to be hot passions, obviously, for him. That is going to spark hot passions against him. So I think what solidified my confidence, Trump is he's a known entity. He's Trump. I think you know the level of positivity he's going to attract. You know the high level of negativity that's going to be there to meet those positive folks, those supporters on the battlefield. So the real difference was, what were the Democrats going to do? And as things just got progressively worse for the Democrats presidentially, from the obvious, even my dog knew it, cognitive decline of Joe Biden, and then they give him the hook, and then forward the Kamala Harris candidacy without a single vote being cast for her, without a single. Here I am doing a conservative talk show saying Democrats, I feel for you. I'm taking calls from Democrats saying, could we please have a primary? Could we please have 4 or 5 people, and maybe Kamala would prevail in that scrum, or maybe not, but at least something that resembles fair competition. That did not serve her well. Kamala was also not served well by her near complete lack of campaign skill set. It was one of the truly worst campaigns ever run by anyone. And as that began to take shape, the Trump victory became a lot easier to envision, because while there were a lot of things that were unknown, a lot of things that were hidden factors yet to be played out, one thing that was clear, and that was the Democrats had dug themselves an enormous hole, which is part of why Trump won.
It's such a like how quickly things evolve in politics that Trump was the known quantity in that election. Like when you think about 2016,
Precisely.
where everyone was like,
Precisely.
what the heck is happening with this guy? And now it's like the safe choice, the more predictable choice.
Right.
The familiar, the comfort zone
familiar.
of familiarity.
Yeah.
And it even gets weirder that with all of his personal peccadillos, with all of his wheels off behavioral things, one of the reasons he won is that he was the normalcy candidate. I know.
Right. I mean, I think he would. Yeah, I mean,
what?
Right.
But by that I mean not by being a conventional candidate
Right.
in his own way, but through things, if you'll pardon me, things like border normalcy, which means having one, gender normalcy, which means knowing how many there are, a certain trade normalcy, which involves bringing the playing field into a better level place. So even in the way that Nixon, who was not real popular, won in 1968 and 72 by being kind of a normalcy candidate, even though he might not have been that popular, a lot of voters said, well, I can think what I think about him, but it seems like either he's less crazy or the other people are too crazy. And that too was part of the 2024 win.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an interesting comparison to that Nixon election, and just sort of people without condemning any of our elected officials, sort of the devil versus the devil you don't. Yeah.
I will say it was pretty striking to see a 14-point win in Texas. I mean, I don't think any of the polling, if anything, I think one of the takeaways was just, we can only rely on polling in Texas so much coming out of some of these recent cycles that, not universally across the board. I think there were some pollsters who got pretty close, but I don't think anyone was fully predicting 14 points for Trump. I think it was 8.5 for Cruz at the end of the day. So, and that really sets the tone in kind of a problematic way for Democrats heading into 2026, even though folks are talking about them, having just sort of the national wind at their back, just by virtue of it being a Republican in the White House midterm cycle. But on the other hand, we're coming off really a landslide blowout 2 years ago.
Right. I mean, conventional wisdom would say 2026, a midterm year, the president is, dealing with some unpopularity issues, passing, some policies that we will probably, by 2026 be seeing the impact of in one direction or another. Putting aside the ongoing redistricting fight that could change things on the congressional front, Mark, what is sort of your crystal ball telling you at this point for, the lay of the land coming into 2026 for Republicans?
Let's talk about the sort of the midterm math that you referred to. The way it usually goes for Republican and Democrat presidents alike is that when you win the White House, the first midterm is the pendulum swinging back the other way. And the other thing that usually happens in a president's second term, ask Bush, ask Reagan, everybody starts to get tired of you. It's like a coach, you lose the locker room. But here's the thing, and history may record that Trump losing, I know, did he? The Trump not regaining the White House, not reoccupying the White House in 2020 might have been the absolute best thing to happen to him. Because this Trump 2.0, imagine if he had won. It'd have been, first of all, he'd be gone by now. Who knows what we'd have? And I take calls every day from people who say, God's timing, Mark, God's timing. I'll leave that to individuals to discern. But there's no doubt that he was able to hit the ground running like a freshly inaugurated first termer. And energy with a capital E, rather than the kind of fatigue that can kick in at Bush's second term, Reagan's second term, Obama's second term. There's something about that fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth year of being president where everything just starts to become a slog. Trump has been spared all of that, coming back for a 2.0 that, like Grover Cleveland before him, is non-consecutive. And it means that it's a kind of a fresh start that the usual conventional second-term president does not get. So here's how this goes to the midterm. The fatigue factor might not be so large. And Trump may be, I mean, listen, these first 6 months have been exhausting. I mean, for critics and fans alike, just keeping track of, the usual saying is, are you tired of the winning yet? And it hasn't all been winning, and some of it's been difficult, and there are critics to be found around every corner. But it may be that pure results and a kind of an eye-opening change in the kind of voters that Trump is attracting, poaching away some of the working class, poaching away. Listen, poaching implies theft, like you're not entitled to them. Increasing numbers of young voters, increasing numbers of minority voters. If this continues, you can't help but feel pretty good about Republicans in the midterms. But then the lesson of all life kicks in, and that is don't ever get comfortable. Also, the midterms are forever from now.
Right.
Primaries in Texas in March. November of next year is like on Carl Sagan's cosmic calendar. It's in the deep, deep distance. So the only thing certain in life is change. Pendulums can swing in a variety of ways. But you have to say if the elections were held right now, they'd go pretty well for Republicans. But they're not held right now, are they?
Right. And if you think about everything that's happened in the last 6 months, and then how long we have until the midterms, it's like that could go, the pendulum could swing back and forth, and just how quickly Trump moves, through everything. It could really go in a lot of directions between now and then.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you think back to that crazy period in July a year ago where you get a assassination attempt, a change in who the, presumed Democratic nominee is going to be at the top of the ticket. Like, let alone a year and a half, these things can change, on a dime. And I think, there's also the conversation about who ends up being the nominee for Republicans. I guess the various nominees, not just for the U.S. Senate race that everyone's talking about these days. But, I think that could, that's another thing that has to play out before we have any sense of what November, a year and a half from now, will look like.
Right, right. I will share a fun fact, which is that you mentioned Grover Cleveland, the only other non-consecutive president. You might know this, my cat is named after Grover Cleveland.
Did not know that.
Yeah. And I actually adopted him. The reason he's named after a president at all is that I adopted him on the eve of the 2016 election. I was living in rural Pennsylvania, was covering the election. I was out at Trump rallies all the time. I was out in Scranton with Hillary and out with, Trump. And I adopted him, maybe like right around Halloween. So right before, and then thought I'd name him the second most cat-like name of a president, which is Grover. The first being
Millard?
Garfield.
Mm.
I thought that was
too easy. That's it. I'm gonna go Millard. For Millard Fillmore. Millard's a
Millard
good
is
boy
pretty
cat
good.
name.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be right? Yeah.
I approve though. Grover's good.
And now it's funny because I did not realize that was the election. Of course, where at that time I didn't know who would win, but I also didn't know that he would go on to be the next
very prescient.
non-consecutive president.
Right.
What did you say? God's timing.
There you go. It works in a number of ways.
Yeah.
Just to dovetail real quick on the notion of things that could change, because you're sitting there, we all agree it is July, about to be August. The primaries are still a good way down the road, and November seems to be on the distant horizon. But if you are a Democrat, and you're thinking, and pardon the way this sounds, you're looking for something to go wrong, as Republicans do and Democrats. Like, please let something go wrong that we can weaponize, that we can take advantage of, that we can turn to our advantage. Look at what they would be. They really would be either the economy, the border, the world, and the world go crazy. I mean, if we get a Russia-Ukraine peace deal, if we get some end to Israel and Hamas, where they can actually be defeated, we can have actual peace in the Middle East. On the economy, inflation seems pretty under control right now. The tariffs that everybody thought we'd be, in our front yard eating our neighbor's liver because the tariffs were going to destroy us and send us into 14 recessions and 16 depressions. It simply has not happened. The things that in the border seems, silly me, secure. That what's the thing that's going to go wrong? I guess the economy always can. The world always can. but boy, one wonders where the bottom drops out. What we would need to have happen that would suddenly be such a chink in Trump's armor, such an enormous hole for him to dig out of. Again, anything's possible, but that's part of why confidence is high, because the things he actually ran on are things that actually, for the moment, seem to be working.
Well, and I think, and we'll talk about this with some Texas candidates as well, like there is certainly in Texas a sense of like it would have to be significantly wrong for, even for Texas Republicans particularly to turn on President Trump. But you know, there are certain candidates in Texas who sometimes seem a little impervious. And to your question, what could go wrong? What could go so wrong that it would change the political calculus or the common wisdom? Let's take a quick break for a sponsor message, and then we'll get into some of these Texas-specific races. Today's episode is supported by members of the Texas Tribune. Texas needs trusted journalism. Help sustain fact-based reporting with your donation. Become a member of the Texas Tribune today at texastribune.org/donate. It's texastribune.org/donate. Well, Mark, obviously, when I talk about sort of Teflon candidates, let's talk about the Cornin Paxton race for U.S. Senate. I know you've talked to John Cornyn plenty of times in your career. Our longtime U.S. Senator facing the toughest primary of his career. What are you sort of reading in the tea leaves there? And or by tea leaves, I mean very clear polling that he is falling behind.
Gosh, this is, we could do 5 episodes
Yes.
on this alone. Cornyn has been a fixture for a really long time. Conservative callers have been calling me for a very long time, talking about how dissatisfied they are with Cornyn. Surely this time we're going to primary him. Surely this time there's going to be a more bold conservative. And this is before the ascendancy of Trump. And it simply never, ever happened. Was it Steve Stockman who came within 40 of him in 2014 or so? That's as close as anybody's gotten. He's been untouchable. Now, nobody has been running against him named Ken Paxton.
Right.
So let's go chronologically. If we're talking a few months ago, the attorney general is someone who has taken some slings and arrows, been through some controversies, and emerged virtually unscathed. You could not find somebody who was a staunch Paxton supporter who said, some of this tax stuff, I'm out. Some of this courtroom stuff, I'm out. Even some of the personal stuff, I'm out. You could not find that. But that was 3 months ago. Speaking of change, you could say things have changed. So now, with Angela having filed for divorce and with the Cornyn team clearly willing to come out with some, brutal ads coming after brutal and accurate. That's what makes them so brutal. About the personal stuff. The big X factor here, the big variable, is how much will that hurt Ken? It can't not hurt him. If it's only 1 or 2% of people who go, dude, I love you, but I'm out, then of course he's still viable. Some internal polling, which is almost always useless when candidates go, oh, I've got my own polling. Sure you do. They tell you what you want to hear. He had like a 20-point lead on Cornyn. I think the UT Tyler people came out some weeks ago and showed it as roughly a 10-point lead, but that was before all of this. I think it'd be a good season for a little bit of polling like right now to see if it were more like 8 or 9 or more like 1 or 2, or if the leads evaporated completely. I don't believe it had, as this whole messy, unfortunate, sad story played out. And believe you me, the least scientific thing in the world is talk show calls and Twitter, but they're interesting. They're anecdotal. You find out what a smattering of people think. And I said, listen, if you have been a strong Paxton supporter, but this is just a bridge too far. I'd always said, one of the things I always said is if Angela forgives him, then who are we to continue? Who is anybody to continue to, bog down in the personal stuff? Well, Ken can't use that anymore. His supporters can't use that anymore. So my goal was to find out how much it mattered. And in a few days of calls and a few days of Twitter polls, for whatever they're worth, it looked like almost nothing. Now, I know that it's not nothing. There has to be a voter defined by general support of Paxton, even a strong support of Paxton, but this is just too much. My friends at Texas Values, Jonathan Sines, wonderful group. They've been aligned with Paxton on issue after issue after issue after issue. But one of the things that means a lot to them at Texas Values, hence the name, is the sanctity of marriage. And so they pulled their endorsement. Now, it's not like they've endorsed Cornyn or they don't want Ken to win, but they just cannot have their endorsement there in their literature for him. That can't be your best day on the campaign trail. But if it is just a small bit of damage, which it may be, I'll never forget one of the texts I got. We have a text line. We got calls. There are too many ways to get a hold of me these days. But somebody wrote me and said, Mark, there's no amount of Paxton misbehavior that makes John Cornyn acceptable. And now this is a pretty MAGA-based, grassroots conservative thing to say. But if that's prevalent, of course Paxton remains viable. Now, is this me predicting that he will win? Absolutely not. Because I think even that 10-point lead is phony. This will be a close race. It will be hard fought. And the driving factor will be who offers himself up as the most reliable Trump ally in the remainder of this Trump term. Paxton's credentials are absolutely rock star quality on that. But the personal stuff may be a bit of a drag on that. For Cornyn, around whom there has been enormous doubt. I don't think Cornyn likes guns as much as he wants you to think he does. He certainly did not like Trump as much as he now seems to like him. I mean, there is zero distance. Cornyn is Trump. Ever since Trump won, it has been a genius bit of positioning. All the ads show Cornyn and Trump. Cornyn loves Trump. Trump loves Cornyn. He's one of the most valuable allies he has in the Senate. Quick thing, and I'll shut up. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I don't know if there'll be an endorsement. Would Trump endorse Paxton? It looked for a while, 6 months ago. Yeah, well, sure, they've been friends forever. But would he want to issue that kind of a slap to a sitting senator who's very important to him now? And if Trump endorses Cornyn, whoa, there's a large part of the base that will go into open revolt. So that seems to me like a race where Trump is able to say, Ken, I've loved him forever, good friend, Cornyn, valuable ally, important guy, I love him, and just kind of stay out of it and let voters have their say. And what will that say be? I have no idea. It will be a measure of how much rock star power Paxton is able to maintain. And I think it's going to be considerable versus how good a job Cornyn will do of convincing voters that he will absolutely be a Trump ally. And he's done, quite frankly, a wonderful job of doing that. So that's where it lay. I think it's a close race and one of those wonderful things that are impossible to call right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what you were saying there about the voters who have that view that, whatever Paxton's behavior is, it's irrelevant in assessing whether Cornyn, whether they'll ever support Cornyn. I think that's kind of that encapsulates the challenge that Cornyn is facing right now. And I guess it also gets to the other point about, electability and kind of the argument that, and, I think this could potentially play into Trump's decision about whether to get involved. He wants to maintain the Senate. There's sort of this view out there that, maybe Paxton still wins, but the national Republicans have to put their resources more so in Texas than they would like, and that takes away from, North Carolina, other states. I mean, I guess I'm curious, Mark, if you have any thoughts on the electability question and sort of, Ken Paxton. I think you can look at any data point you want to sort of justify your view. I mean, he came within striking distance of losing in 2018, but on the other hand, 2022, he wins by a comfortable, I think, 10-point margin. So given all the kind of the data points swirling around and what you've heard, I mean, do you feel like Paxton presents an electability problem for Republicans if he's the nominee or not?
Not as much of one as the Cornyn team would have you believe. So what does Cornyn bring to the table? A track record of being thoroughly palatable to a sufficient number of Republicans to win comfortably ever since he's been running. Who doesn't want that? There are people who want to say that if Paxton is the nominee, that he will be a lot more vulnerable. I don't know that that's true. Is it mathematically, do the data points suggest that Cornin, first of all, either one of these guys beats Colin Allred. Period, paragraph, end of story. There is zero chance of a Democrat winning this seat. The question is, how big will the Republican margin be? Now, and listen, we all, those of us in conservative land, we still remember and are still stung and frightened by how freakishly close Beto came to Ted Cruz in 2018. I mean, how in the world did that even happen? And it makes us think you never can tell when it might happen again. Colin Allred ain't Beto is what comforts me at night. But here's how this comes with the data points and the notion of how either of them might go. It is possible, in fact, probable, that Cornin would win by a slightly larger margin than Paxton would. But since, if I'm right, that there's no chance of a Democrat victory, go with whomever you like. It's not one of those situations where, well, we like this Republican, but he might lose. That's just simply not the case. Here are the variables. No matter, this is going to be one of the ugliest, most expensive, messy, terrible primaries in the history of the state. Great business for me in the talk show, but great business for y'all. Those of us who are involved in punditry and analysis, the gods will be smiling. But there'll be so much blood on the walls by the time they're done. And whoever loses, there are going to be a lot of people who are really upset. The people who voted for, if Paxton wins, the people who voted for Cornin are going to have to be wheedled and cajoled and attracted to come over and vote for Paxton using the logic, we can't have a Democrat win. Remember Beto, we can't have that happen again. And I think that'll be largely successful. If Cornin fends off the Paxton challenge, look out. The Paxton people who didn't like Cornin before and are really going to be bitter about him now are going to have to get that same appeal message. Like, okay, the primary's over. It was rough. It was nasty. But now we got to gather together as Republicans and do what we're supposed to do, and that's beat Democrats. And so you've got to come over and find a way to hold your nose, if you view it as holding your nose, and support John Cornyn anyway. That, I believe, is a harder sell, which is why Cornyn would probably, if I'm just picking crazy predictive numbers, I think Cornyn wins by 8 and Paxton wins by 4. But again, that's at the election right now. If Cornyn's support for Trump is somehow drawn into doubt, if the personal stuff starts to take hold with Ken in a way that it's not doing right now, then either of those figures is shiftable.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like we've heard this argument a lot from Dems, right? Of, I mean, that was almost the argument that like George P. Bush and Eva Guzman were making, which is, we can't put him up because he'll lose to a Democrat. Obviously, he won handily. So it does, again, a lot can change, but it's sort of like with President Trump, with Paxton, like a lot would have to change if nothing has sort of penetrated his base yet. Let's turn briefly to the heir apparent to the Attorney General's office. We're going to have our first open GOP primary for Attorney General in a decade. The first without, the specter of Paxton hanging over it. So, well, let me say this. I think the specter of Paxton is hanging over this race pretty effectively, but
you are correct.
Yes, without
you are totally correct.
Yeah, without the embodiment of Paxton in the race. So, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but the field for the GOP looks pretty set with, Senator Mays Middleton, who is self-funding $10 million in his campaign so far. State Senator Joan Huffman, sort of a little bit more of the establishment Houston base, and Aaron Reitz, who is former Assistant Attorney General to Ken Paxton, former DOJ attorney, getting a lot of money, nowhere near $10 million, but really trying to carve out his lane as the Paxton heir apparent. Mark, just to begin with, like, what, in terms of your listeners and people you're talking to, is there awareness about this campaign? Is there awareness about these candidates? What's the name recognition issue here?
As state senators, Joan Huffman and Mays Middleton start out with an advantage because no one knows who Aaron Reitz is, or they didn't until a few weeks ago. They know now, if they pay some attention to social media and have been watching some of his media appearances, if they take a look at Ken's endorsement of him, which is not a small thing. The way this one shakes out right now is Joan Huffman is going to get a lot of the GOP establishment, Eva Guzman style vote. Mays Middleton is a better conservative than Joan Huffman is, but is he Paxton friendly enough? Is he kind of MAGA grassroots enough? Not that that's 90% of Texas Republican voters. I mean, if it were, Cornyn wouldn't have been so unbeatable for lo these many years. But if with Aaron Wrights around, I've spoken to this gentleman a couple of times, and he has like no fear. He's just jumping in there and saying and being very vocal about the very Paxtonian kinds of things that he's going to do. He was on, I think, a station in Austin recently. I just a clip the other day. I'm coming after these blue cities. They're not going to be able to do these. I mean, it sounded like the absolute linear continuation of the Paxton style of being attorney general. I don't know that Mays Middleton is ever going to say that I'm going to do everything Paxton did, at least in office. I know that Joan Huffman's not going to say anything like that. So the variable will be how much do Texas voters, how much do Republican, first in the primary, of course, how much do Texas Republican voters want an absolute continuation of Paxton style policies? There's a lot of evidence that that's exactly what the Republican flavor is going to be. But for fundraising, familiarity, name recognition, both Mays Middleton and Joan Huffman have more. So Aaron Wrights has all the right ingredients. He certainly has the right talking points, but still an uphill climb.
Yeah, I think it also strikes me as kind of the ultimate test of whether voters still care about experience, and whether kind of that as a campaign pitch. You look at Aaron Wrights kind of pitching himself as he was the offensive coordinator under Paxton. If you like what Paxton was doing, suing the Biden administration, I was at the center of that. Joan Huffman kind of making a similar but different experience-based argument, talking about her, time as a judge and prosecutor, overseeing a bunch of important committees in the Senate. And Middleton obviously has that experience in the Senate as well, but he doesn't have that type of, Aaron Wrights style legal credentials, just being sort of enmeshed in this conservative legal movement. But he does have $10 million. So I think it's kind of the ultimate test of whether, the voters care enough about experience to overcome just a seemingly on its face insurmountable money advantage.
I'm going to make an observation about
yeah,
experience. It has never mattered less. And I don't in Republican land particularly, and the evidence of it is there every day. There's a guy who ran for president who had no political experience and got more passion than anybody since Reagan. His name is Donald Trump. I mean, obviously, experience meant something for 2.0 because he had been president, which is why 2.0 is even better than 1.0. He knows Washington now. But Senator Cornyn, when I talk to him, always it talks about, and I say, listen, you and Ken, it seems like you're going to, if you indeed have become the Trump acolyte that you offer yourself to be, isn't it pretty true that you and Ken will have just about the same voting record? I mean, what's really going to be the difference between what kind of senator you will be? And the Cornyn response is very, very often, I have all this experience. I won't say it doesn't matter. It obviously matters. Experience is a good thing to have. But what Republican voters in particular are looking for is, how's your fight? How much will you fight? What kind of energy do you bring? Do you have the right enemies? I mean, do you have your eye focused on battles against wokeness, battles against profligate spending, battles against unconstitutional governance? If you've got your eyes clear about that, not only do we not care that you don't have experience, we love that you've come from the private sector. Because I think there's a kind of we've had it up to our eyeballs with career politicians. Oh, I've been here for 25 years. Big deal. Give me somebody with a fresh eye, a fresh take on things. So I'll just say that experience is never a bad thing to have, but I don't know when it's ever been less important.
And experience is all relative, right? I mean, I think the AG's race is a great example of this. You've got Aaron Wright sort of portraying himself as the political outsider and also the one experienced, as the offensive coordinator that sort of backs someone like Senator Middleton into a corner of, well, his experience is in, state legislating, which is sort of almost the worst of both in the
Right.
eyes of the Republican
Liability in
voter.
the eyes of
Right.
some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will say, Senator Middleton has gotten a ton of support from other members of the legislature, many of whom are grassroots Republicans. So, you know, I think there's sort of the social media, the attacking in TV ads, hits, radio hits, like that makes a huge difference in terms of name recognition. And then there's sort of the underground world in which a lot of politics happens that's less obvious to the naked eye, I think, where I do think Senator Middleton is pretty experienced in working in those circles. Big
Certainly.
GOP donor.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. Um, we could obviously get into a lot of other races, but we will sort of leave it there. I mean, Mark, just big picture, what's sort of your outlook for Republicans, between now and when we get up to that primary and then ultimately general? I mean, what are the variables you're keeping an eye on?
Recent history is a prologue, and once things have been going in a certain way, only two things can happen. They can continue in that certain way, or the pendulum can start to swing back. Uh, Paxton remains a rock star in terms of what he has done. The personal stuff is a big we'll see, whether it's a Chinese water torture, if you can still say that, but the death of a thousand cuts, let's go with that.
Sure.
Over time, if it starts to wear him down, I don't know. I don't think that it will. What he has done is sufficiently impactful that I think it's the kind of thing that gives Aaron Wright a chance in a battle where he would ordinarily have a big struggle against Huffman and Middleton. That's going to be an interesting three-way race. Dan Patrick remains just a force of nature. He is ageless. He's out there, even things that are not 100% popular in the conservative base. The THC ban, he will not let go of that THC ban. I happen to think he's correct about that, but I took a lot of calls from him. Mark, I love Dan Patrick, but he's wrong on the THC thing. He doesn't care. He thinks it's right. He's going for it. Various the ways in which he has piloted the Senate in a way that gives the Texas Senate a better sort of legislative image than the messy House does, coming off the difficult era of Dade Phelan, although the Dustin Burrows era seems to have been gone much better. Patrick remains a power. And to finish at the top there with Governor Abbott, it is not the same Greg Abbott as 4 or 6 or 8 years ago. I was, not to make everything a measure of the calls I take or whatever, but it's the people I talk to. It's the studies of human nature that I get from doing this show every day. There was conservative frustration about Abbott to the extent that when Don Huffines and Alan West ran against him, I took all kinds of calls from people who said, "Yeah, Mark, Abbott's going down, man. It's either Alan West or Don Huffines." And by the way, I love Alan West. I love Don Huffines. Huffines ran a great campaign. Huffines would say something about property taxes. Abbott would say it the next day. Huffines made Abbott a better candidate 4 years ago. But I told listeners, to their chagrin, there was no way Abbott was getting beat. There was no way in the world either of these primary challenges would come close to him, because what you've got to do, it's the Mark Davis rule of primaries. The only way you're going to win, it doesn't matter how awesome you are, how much we love you, you've got to create a desire to fire the incumbent. That's what Paxton's got to do. He's got to create it. It doesn't matter how awesome Paxton is or the great things he's done or the rock star status he has. I mean, it's lovely. That's why he's going to come close. But he will only win if he creates a palpable desire on the part of a state that's loved him for 2 decades to fire John Cornyn. If he can do that, he wins. If he can't, then he doesn't. The point being here is that Abbott has read the political room so well and has seen the Trumpification of Texas, the further Trumpification of Texas, that I don't hear a peep of conservative complaint about Abbott anymore at all, which would seem to indicate, my long-winded way of saying, that the deeper red status of Texas either continues or stays where it is. The notion of the pendulum swinging back and maybe a hint of purple working toward blue, maybe Colin Allred has a chance, and then throw in redistricting, which we do at a whole,
Right.
There may not simply be, Mark Veazey and Julie Johnson may not be around anymore. Let's just say that it's trending well for Texas as a red state.
And you want to talk about a war chest? I mean, Governor Abbott just what was it, $20 million in a week and $86 million total?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's a big part of the conversation with 2026 too. Just thinking about back to 2018 when, as we were discussing, things got really close, but you had Governor Abbott kind of lifting all boats on the Republican side further down the ballot with his blowout win that same year.
Right.
And, to your point, Mark, I think with Abbott sort of reading the conservative tea leaves and, shoring up his right flank. I mean, you just look at the agenda that he's rolled out for this special session. I mean, it's kind of a grab bag of anything you could want that hasn't yet been accomplished. So I think he's pretty bulletproof heading into March.
Right. And if he's got all that money and no primary challenger, it's a lot of wealth to spread around.
Right.
It's an enviable place to be.
Yes, absolutely. Our colleague Alejandro Serrano, when we saw that number, said, "Imagine what the Texas Tribune could do with that money." And I said, "Are you proposing we rob Greg Abbott?"
Donation pitch. Time for that donation pitch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm sure Dave Carney's jumping to send that over to us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I
right.
think we're top of the list for,
Right.
yes. Well, we will have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us, Mark. This was a fantastic conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Before we head out, we will just say thank you to this week's sponsor, members of the Texas Tribune, which could be any of you who are listening. Become a member of the Texas Tribune today at texastribune.org/donate. That is this week's episode of the Tribcast. Jasper, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Our producers are Chris and Rob. You can get this podcast anywhere you get podcasts or on youtube.com. And we will see you next week.